and we do that year round, and it's a free service available to any Yukoner. We also are the chapter of a Startup Canada, and you've probably seen many of the events that we've been running throughout the past couple of years, also to support Yukon entrepreneurs. So to begin, this particular theme is presented, so is marketing, and is presented by Neil Fletcher, who is a founder and principal of Cashier Consulting. Neil has over 20 years of experience, of marketing experience, communications and engagement in Canada, the US, Europe, and India. He has held senior in-house roles at Rolls-Royce, the aerospace and in energy, Sky TV and telecoms, and the UK Nuclear Decommission Authority, a government agency. His job is to help organizations, their senior leaders, and their staff thrive, so the organization and the people benefit. He loves his work, and we have worked with Neil in the past, and we love the work that Neil has produced for us. And without further ado, I lift the floor to Neil, who is joining us from beautiful Dawson City.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, William. Thanks very much, everyone, for making the time to join the webinar today. As William said, this is about marketing and branding in a crisis. And what I'd like to cover today is how you can help your business, your organization, not just survive this crisis, but really thrive. And there are some great things and simple things that you can do which are really powerful, which will help you to do just that. So what I'd like to cover in the webinar today is, first of all, talk about some of the businesses who are actually thriving, booming, and doing really well. I'd like to outline some major trends, some global trends that will actually affect us in the Yukon, and also your individual businesses, and how maybe you can take some advantage of some of those trends and look at some opportunities linked to those. I'd like to look at some lessons from previous recessions and look at what are the characteristics of businesses that have really thrived and really hit the ground running after the recession. And I'm going to be setting you guys some homework. There's another webinar, part 2, in 2 weeks' time. So I'm going to set you guys some homework. So you need to pay attention. I will be asking questions later. There will be time for Q&A at the end as well. And I'm also delighted to say that John Glyn Morris is going to join us throughout this webinar. And I'm going to be asking John to tell you a little bit more about a fantastic branding project for the Yukon that John and I are involved in, and John is leading. So there's going to be quite a lot to cover. I'm going to go through it at a fair pace. Remember that you can ask questions through the chat function. There will be time for questions at the end as well. I'm going to give you a lot of examples from different types of businesses. Of course, this is trying to reach as many people as possible, so apologies, it's going to be a little generic in places. I hope it will be a useful refresher and reminder for some of you. I hope everyone will find something to take away that they can really use to help them thrive at the moment. So one of the most important things in any type of crisis is how you view it and how you frame it in your mind. Is it a danger, or is it actually an opportunity, or quite likely it's a mixture of both? So we're in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic at the moment, which is causing economies in Canada and around the world to contract really seriously. And there have been recessions, global recessions before, 2008-9, the financial crisis. And we even had a recession in the years after the First World War caused by a Spanish flu pandemic. So it's not a one-off event. In the Yukon, we have exceptional circumstances. We have a lot of government support here. And I'm going to be talking to you towards the end of this webinar about the Pivot program from Yukon College, which is a fantastic piece of support for all of our businesses. We're a long way. We're physically isolated here, which is helpful in terms of a pandemic, but can be challenging in terms of supply chain and logistics. And stuff is expensive in the north as well, and it's expensive to run a business. So we have some very particular characteristics here. We don't know how long the lockdown is going to last. We know there will be severe economic impact. We know there's going to be social impact as well, on people's mental health, on kids not being able to continue with their educations. There's going to be a lot of different factors at play. But there are many opportunities within this crisis, as well as threats and danger. And I guess it's up to us as business people. Are we going to hunker down, or are we actually going to look at what we can do to thrive and what we can do to be successful and help our communities get back up on their feet again? So here are some organizations that are doing very, very well at the moment. Zoom being one of them, of course. And the reality is some businesses are actually struggling to cope with the amount of business that they have at the moment. So medical supply companies, of course, are doing incredibly well. People who supply headsets and video cameras, they're doing well too. Various technologies that help us to communicate. Zoom has become a household name over the past couple of months, and its share price has absolutely rocketed. People are also looking for entertainment. So Netflix has been acquiring millions and millions of customers, and Steam, you can see the Steam logo in the bottom left-hand side there, a big online gaming company. They're doing well. Revenues are going through the roof. So lots of people are doing really, really well. And what I'd like to ask you to think about is to focus on three things that we know are characteristics of businesses that have done really well in previous recessions. So here are those three characteristics. Now, as you can see, there's a picture of an American bank there during the Great Depression. And we know from a variety of recessions that have happened over the years, there are three key things that businesses will help businesses to thrive. One is having the right product or service, and that means being flexible and being able to adapt to new circumstances and changes that come through. A strong and authentic brand. So that's about having being true to your brand values, and I'm going to be talking more about that later on, but also being authentic. So a brand is not just words, but it's about what you do as well. And the third thing is about focus on the customer. And I know many of you are fantastic at focusing on your customers or your clients, but that focus is about building trusting relationships. And if you have a trusting relationship, then you will find that your business will thrive even more, even after these difficult times. And I'm going to be asking some questions at the end, setting some homework for you guys, which will be based around these three key lessons. So what will the next normal look like? Well, nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows what the future has in store at any time. And it's always uncertain. And here in the Yukon, we are a long way away from the rest of the world. But what happens in San Francisco, in Stuttgart, or in Shanghai does have an effect on us here. And so I'm going to just step you through some global trends that are things that are happening in the world now because of the crisis, and how they will affect us in the Yukon and your businesses. And as I go through, I'd like you to be thinking, where is the opportunity for me? Where is the opportunity for my business within this? So the first trend I'd like to just talk a little bit about is supply chains. And we know that some people have got caught off guard. That, you know, for example, in France, part of their pandemic response was to quickly order personal protective equipment from China. Obviously, China got the virus first, so that fell down. So globalized long supply chains have shown their weaknesses recently. In the Yukon, we are at the end of very long supply chains, and food security, for example, has been an issue even before this crisis. So, you know, there's an opportunity, particularly in agriculture and food, to supply locally and for people to buy locally. And, there's a real opportunity here, and not just for the food and agriculture sector, but for other sectors too. People are likely to want to buy more locally produced, locally manufactured, local services that they can depend on. So there's a real opportunity to emphasize localness and Yukonness. And as I said before, John Glenn Morris is going to talk to us a bit more about Yukonness and the brand of the Yukon. That's one trend that's happening. The next is resilience and efficiency. And this is obviously an internal thing for your organization, for your business. And this is about how you can survive first and then thrive. And this is about being financially resilient, but also being able to adapt to circumstances. So, in these changing trends, in the changes into home working, how are you able to adapt? And how are you able to adapt in terms of hygiene precautions as well? If you have to serve customers, if you're in a business where you deal face to face with customers, are you able to flex and adapt? And it's also about having strong customer relationships. You can build great goodwill with customers, but also with suppliers, with your business partners, with people who work for you, your staff. You need to be efficient. And, during an economic boom, it hides a lot of these things. When times get tough, then you suddenly realize, are you running an efficient business, and who is running an efficient business? And that's about controlling costs, of course, but it's also about efficient marketing. So it's about gaining a good return on your marketing investment. And I'm going to be talking a bit more in detail about that in the second webinar in a couple of weeks' time. And knowing who your customers are, who are your most valuable customers, and how you target them. So now there is a real opportunity for everyone to spend some time and focus on your business model. How can you become more resilient? How can you become more efficient? How can you reach out to customers better? And the Yukon College's Innovation and Entrepreneurship team have this fantastic pivot program. I'll say a bit more about that later, but this is actually an opportunity to get expertise from people in marketing, HR, legal, supply chain, all sorts of experts, IT, and to gain their knowledge and their advice to help you pivot, to help you become more resilient and more efficient. Home working. So suddenly millions of people have realized that they can work from home, and they've got used to Zoom, and they've got a webcam, and they're getting to grips with what this means, and setting up a home office, and finding some of those trials and tribulations from working at home. So there's clear opportunities in IT, there's opportunities for the equipment that people need, but also training. Most people are not necessarily naturally familiar with Zoom and video conferencing. Could I just ask, whoever's just joined, could you please mute yourself for the time being, please? Thank you very much. Entertainment is also a really important thing for people. I said about Netflix, but actually board games, traditional board games like Monopoly are flying off the shelves. And exercise is really important for a lot of people, staying healthy. I showed the Peloton logo. These guys make fantastic top of the range exercise bikes. They cost like $3,000, plus you subscribe to a monthly service, and they're doing phenomenally well. So there's an opportunity there in terms of lifestyle and exercise. And e-commerce, whatever products you're selling, it's really quite simple and relatively inexpensive for people to, any businesses, to be able to set up an online store. There are things that you can use like Shopify and processing credit card payments that are relatively inexpensive now, that a business of any size can actually do. And then, of course, if you're online, you can spread your market internationally. You don't just have to sell to people who walk into your store. You can sell to people across Canada and even across the world. And it's not just products. You could also sell expertise. And I know a couple of people on this webinar today are looking at how they can and actually that they do sell their expertise over video conferencing, or package it up into a YouTube video or a subscription service that you can then sell to anybody anywhere in the world. There are lots of opportunities here. The next trend is about government intervention, and in the Yukon we have a pretty healthy relationship with the government. Everybody always has criticisms of the government, of course. I think the thing to say here is that this is particularly relevant to those businesses that deal with the US. So, you know, in the US, there is less harmony generally within society and between societies and government. There are therefore people wanting to remove the stay-at-home regulations much sooner than perhaps some state and city governments would like. It's likely, based on evidence from previous recessions and looking at the Spanish flu pandemic as well, that cities that have stricter health lockdowns during a pandemic actually bounce back more quickly. So if you do work with companies in the US, if you do sell to US consumers, you might find you have to prioritize other markets before returning to some of your US customers. The next trend. The next trend is more scrutiny for business. And I've got a picture of a piece of Volkswagen advertising here, and I'm sure you've heard of the Volkswagen diesel emissions scandal. So even the best companies can fall foul of what's commonly termed greenwash. So this is pretending to be more socially or environmentally responsible through your products and services than you actually are. And you know that there is an increasing trend. Large companies, for example, like Unilever, who are a global consumer products company, they have put aside $500 million to ensure that their suppliers remain in business during the crisis. So that's about focusing not just on the bottom line and profit, which is important, but making sure that you bring other people up with you as well. And Shell, the major oil and gas company, actually links its executive pay to its carbon emissions. So this is really quite something for an oil and gas company to have that link with their executives' remuneration. And why are they doing this? Well, there was a recent study by Edelman, who are a international marketing and communications company, and they look at trust, and they have this product that they have called their Trust Barometer, which measures people's trust in companies, brands, government, media, etc. And a recent study showed that in Canada, 64% of people want to buy from a socially responsible company. And that's a pretty large number. But the other number is 71% of people in Canada have said that if they see a company putting profits before people during this crisis, that brand will lose their trust forever. So it's really important, you know, think about what you do. How socially responsible are you? You're probably very socially responsible, but it's important that customers know that. So it's important to remind people about how socially responsible you are and how you do that too. And because that's really, really important. People are expecting this of businesses now, and this wasn't the case even a few years ago. The next trend is about change. And you know, this is kind of obvious, but really needs some careful thinking. So markets are changing, industries are changing, and customer behavior is changing too. So, you know, tourism has had a massive, has been impacted massively by the coronavirus crisis. You know, particularly for Dawson and the Yukon, it's a huge impact. Mining is has also suffered from delayed openings for some of our big mines. So that's a real big shock to our economy here. Those industries have been really affected. Markets have been affected as well. You've seen, oil prices even became negative for some time. These are almost unheard of events. So there's lots of volatility. Stock markets have crashed and have recovered to a degree. And the effect of the stock market is not just on investment bankers' bonuses, and not many people shed many tears over that, but school teachers' pensions are invested in the stock markets, and I'm sure many people on this webinar have investments that are stock market linked. So it affects us all. So it's going to impact people's ability, and most importantly, perhaps, their willingness to spend, and willingness to spend on discretionary items. So people are going to be a lot more cost conscious. And again, a piece of research that was done by McKinsey, a management consultancy, has shown that over the next couple of months, people are going to be far more reticent about buying large purchase items, items with a large purchase price. So cars and some durable goods for the home, as well as some expensive things. So there's going to be quite a change in people's spending behaviors. And the way to help to mitigate that risk for your business is to understand, what are your customers' issues and problems and concerns around that? Can you talk to them and find out exactly, so you're forewarned? One of the main things here is, that understanding of customers. And I talked about Unilever earlier, and how they work with their suppliers. One of the other interesting things that they do is in developing countries. So for example, in India, they don't sell huge packages of things like washing powder. They sell small packages, small sachets, little low cost packaged items. So this gets their brand out there, it gets people purchasing, but they understand that many of their customers don't have the money or the cash flow to be able to buy larger products. So it's about shaping what you do for your customers and your customer needs. But one of the things you really need to avoid is price cutting. So that should be absolutely the last resort. Don't cut prices. Now, it can be tempting to cut prices, lower prices, because it gets people to spend. Yes, but fundamentally, you're damaging your profitability, and you're damaging your ability to re-increase your prices at a later date. If you commoditize what you do, you take away your ability to raise prices or to charge what that service or product is actually worth to somebody. And there are lots of ways to get around that. You might have seen some advertising by Yukon Nissan recently. They're offering 180-day free payment terms. So that's helping people to spread the cost of buying a new vehicle. So you can extend payment terms, maybe offer financing, maybe offer to accept credit card payments, which allows people to, whether they're individual consumers or whether they're businesses, to be able to spread that cost themselves. They can choose when they pay off that credit card. But if you just take payment by electronic transfer or by check, that's it. It's gone out their account immediately, and that may prevent them from buying from you. Okay, so those are the trends, and I'd like you to really think what the opportunities are for you within that. And I'm sure many of you know that already. One thing that Lana Selby said to me earlier this morning, actually, is it's easy to think that you know exactly what you should do, but dive deeper. So she said, the magic is inside your head, which I thought was a great way of expressing it. So you know what to do, but maybe you just need to go a little deeper and think a little harder about the best way to do that. So do you need to change your business? Maybe you just need to change a little bit. Maybe you're going to be carrying on business as usual. Maybe you need to change so your offering goes completely online. If you can't deal with customers face to face, or you want to reach out to bigger markets, or maybe you have to completely rethink your business model. Now, those are three very different things, very different implications from that. But whichever type of flex you have to make to your business model, there are three things. Here are the lessons from previous recessions that I'd really like you to focus on. It's having the right product or service, it's having a strong, authentic brand, and it's really being focused on the customer. I'd just like to dive into those three things now in a little more detail and give you some more thoughts. So one of the most important things to think about is, what is the job that your product or service does for your customer? What is the problem that it solves for your customers? Now, to take the example of a truck, you can buy a truck that has four-wheel drive. Now that's a feature, but what you're really buying is the benefit of that feature. So the benefit of that feature is, safer driving, improved road handling, the ability to drive off-road. Those are the benefits that you get from having four-wheel drive. And famously, Theodore Levitt, who was a Harvard business professor in the 1960s, I think, famously said, people don't buy drills because they want drills. People buy drills because what they actually want is quarter-inch holes. And that's a really insightful statement. That is why people buy those products. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment when I talk a bit more about brand. But essentially, it's the benefit that you should be selling from what you offer. And that is really important, and focusing on the job. And this is a really interesting concept, actually. And it sounds very obvious, but here's another example. A cake mix manufacturer found that it wanted to increase its sales of cake mix. How could it do that? And it found it wasn't selling that well. And what they discovered was that they included egg in this cake mix, and they removed egg from their cake mix, which might seem counterintuitive. But what they found was, and this massively increased sales, people like to think, even though they were using a cake mix, they like to think they were still cooking. So what they wanted to do was add an egg, mix it up, bake it, and produce a cake. And so they felt they were actually involved in the process. So by including egg, they were stopping people having that feeling of being involved, and people felt they were cheating by buying it. Kind of weird and counterintuitive, but it's amazing. But you don't get that unless you really understand how your customers think. So you need to think carefully and creatively about whether you have the right product and service and the job that it does for customers. And I'd like to just share one example here with you from Kenya in Africa about a fantastic service. So in this part of Africa, they have this service called M-Pesa, and M is for mobile, and Pesa is the Swahili word for money. And it's a low-cost way for people to transfer money. Now, in that part of Africa, there aren't that many banks. There's very little Wi-Fi coverage. Very few people have smartphones, so you couldn't even think about having an app. And there are hardly any banks. So they came up with this incredibly clever system of sending money verified by SMS messaging, and you can go to a local store, a local trader, and they're all agents for M-Pesa, and you can pay your money in, and they send a text message to the next village or the next town or even the next country to say, yep, money's been paid in, you pay a very small fee, and then somebody can go and pick that cash up. So it's a bit like Western Union or something like that, but verified by text message and very, very little cost to use the service. So it has exploded. It is incredibly popular. It is very profitable, but it's focused on the customer and the market conditions. So it uses very clever technology in the background, but it knows that it can use this network of traders and a network of very simple mobile phones, as you can see there, hardly a smartphone there. And it's easy to use, it's accessible, it's cheap, and it works quickly. So customers love it. So I'd like you to think about that example and see how you could apply some of that to your business. So how do you need to change? I'd like you to really think hard. Bear in mind what Lana Selby said, the magic is in your head, but think about, some of these examples, from Africa, from cake mixes, from all different parts of the world. How can you apply some of those lessons to you? And are you going to have to completely change your business model? Can you move online? And if you do need to move online, then you're probably going to need some help to do that. You're probably going to need some software, some new skills, some new ways of thinking about it. Communicating via video is very different. Having to get to grips with social media, there are 1,000,001 social media channels out there which may or may not be suitable for your product and your customers. TikTok and LinkedIn, have very different audiences. But here's an interesting thing that I heard about. We talked about tourism earlier. In Venice, they have absolutely zero tourists at the moment. So tour guides there have no means of income. So what they've done is they live stream tours. They go around on their own, live streaming a tour of Venice. And they broadcast this online, and people can log in. And then if you like the tour, you give the guy a tip at the end. So it's not guaranteed they'll make money, but if they do a good job of the tour, they'll earn some tips. So it actually keeps them going. And it also gives a service to other people. The people who log in love to see parts of Venice. If you're locked down in your home in a big city in Europe or parts of Ontario, you can actually see some of these fantastic buildings in Venice. It's a great example. The second lesson from those other recessions that I talked about was about having a strong, authentic brand. And you hear the term brand a lot. It's often misused and misunderstood by a lot of people. And essentially, there are two parts to a brand. One is the visuals, the logo, the colors, the templates, the imagery that a brand uses. But the second, and I think almost more important part of it, are the values, the feeling that lies behind that. And I talked a little earlier about consistency. So consistency between what you say your brand is and what you do, and the actions that your company takes, your business takes, is really important. It's like, we all know people who have very, very big stories that they tell, and you kind of wonder, did you actually do that? I'm not sure. And some people, are very straightforward and honest, and whatever they say, they're right, that they've done that. So it's about consistency, being like that the honest person that you believe. And there's probably there is a third element to brand as well, and that's the relationship you have with your customers, which is not totally in your control. So it's how your customers feel about what you do, how they feel about buying from you, and what it means to them. And it's that emotional connection. And I'd like to just give you an example of a couple of brands that you may be familiar with. So here are a couple of organizations, companies that you may have even used their services before. And before I talk about them in particular, I'd just like to talk about the term brand value proposition. Now, you may have heard this term. This is a marketing, kind of technical marketing term, brand value proposition. But essentially, it's the promise. It's the promise that you are making to your customers. And you need to live up to that promise. You need to be consistent. Your deeds need to match the values, the words that you say you believe in. And the brand value proposition is a kind of the sum of all those benefits that a customer gets from working with you, from buying from you. And the more you line up, the more you can get your customers to line up with your brand values, to appeal to them so that they match, the more success you will have, the more you will thrive. So let me just very quickly talk about these two different organizations. So we have Air Canada and Air North. They are both airlines. They both have planes. They take off from Whitehorse Airport, and you can fly to all sorts of places with them. Now, essentially, Air Canada is a lot bigger than Air North. But what's the difference? Well, Air Canada has a huge network of connections. You can fly almost anywhere in the world, with Air Canada, or certainly to a connecting airport where you can get anywhere else in the world. They're fairly competitive on price, not bad. If you look at their visual branding, the logo, the way that they present the name of their organization is very consistent. You will see the same brand and logo on their planes, at the check-in desk, on their website. Very smooth. If you go into the cabins, and particularly in their business class cabins, it all looks very plush, and it's all done in the same corporate colors. It looks really smart. But my experience of Air Canada as a passenger, as a customer, is that I'm rather an inconvenience to them running their airline operations. Is that they'd rather not have me there. I'm sort of in the way, and if I could just just be quiet, sit down, and just not do anything or say anything or interact, then that would be a lot better. And I get the feeling that they don't really care whether I fly with them or not. Now, that's not to say you don't get great staff who work for Air Canada, either check-in desk or in-flight. I've had some good experiences too. But essentially, as an organization, I don't think they really care about my business. And then we have Air North. And it's such a different experience, flying with Air North. I know you know this, but it's, I feel as though I'm a person, I'm talking to another person, whether it's somebody on their check-in desk. They have fantastic, they even give you food between Whitehorse and Dawson. Sometimes I'm starving by the time I get to Dawson Airport, and I really want a cookie, one of their fantastic cookies. And you get a smile from the cabin crew, and they're kind of jolly, and clearly people enjoy working for Air North, so you get a really great feeling off it. And it's such a different experience. And essentially, if you're flying from Whitehorse to Vancouver, you can certainly fly with either airline, but I know who I'd rather fly with. And this is relevant, obviously, for this being consistent in your brand values is really important for individual customers, but it's important if you deal with businesses as well, because businesses are essentially groups of people. So both are important. And consistency is really, really important. And, banks can be terrible too. If you say that customer service is your number one priority, don't keep me waiting on the phone for 15 minutes, playing me constantly a recorded message telling me to look on your website for help. This is not being customer focused. This is being operations focused, like Air Canada. Air Canada are very operations focused, and North is very customer focused. I'm not saying they get everything right all the time, but if they do make a mistake, they tend to put it right pretty quick. I will get off my soapbox now. The third lesson is about focus on the customer. And we've talked about the product, we've talked about the brand. This is the third lesson. Attitude, your attitude as a person, your attitude as an organization to the customers, and the relationship that you can build with your customers. And it's important that that relationship is built on trust. And it really is, if you'll excuse the pun, a leap of faith buying from a company you've never bought with before. Whether you were buying, a tool, or you're buying a more personalized service with a hairdresser, for example, it's a bit of a leap of faith. And you need to trust. You need to trust to part with your money. And it's about, as a business owner and running a business, it's about how you express your brand values through deeds as well as words. Here in the North, we're not blessed with great customer service in many places. I've been into so many eating places and in parts of the Yukon and not had great service. But one place I would say does really focusing on me as a customer is the Coast High Country Inn. I've had a really good experience there. The front desk staff are friendly, helpful. They do stuff and don't charge for it. Simple things. They remember which room I like and they give me my favorite room. And I don't stay in Whitehorse that often, but it's just those little things that make me feel, wow, this is a great place to stay. And I tell other people about it. And getting this recipe right, this focus on the customer and an attitude is really, really important. This will build trust. And if you can build trust, then you can get away from things like competing on price. And that's really important, because here in the North, we're never going to be able to compete on price. We just can't do it. And as I said before, it's a race to the bottom. It's going to erode your profitability and your ability to thrive. And sometimes you instinctively know what is right for your customers. But other times you need to kind of find out, and sometimes you need to search and really dig into what it is that customers really want, how they want to buy from you, and how they use your product. And, you know, at this kind of time, there's time to do research. You can look at what other companies are doing, look online, read trade media. You could also phone some customers, keep in touch, see how they're doing. You know, what are their issues? What are their problems? How can you help them solve them? Or maybe you do a survey monkey. You could actually find out, you know, ask some questions, and there's lots of help on SurveyMonkey to put together a customer survey. You get some really interesting intelligence and really interesting insight you can act on and help your business to thrive. Just going to check my notes to make sure I've said everything there. Yeah, I think I have. So those are the 3 lessons. What I'd like to do now is to just give you 2 examples of local companies that I think have done these things really well. One is Tangerine Technology. They're an IT services company. They're based in BC and the Yukon. They just send a regular email, a weekly, bi-weekly email, and they just talk about the products that are in stock and the services they provide, and services that they can do remotely, and stuff that they can do on site if you want them to visit, and they follow hygiene precautions and that kind of thing. It's very simple, but it really works well. And the other company I just wanted to point out is Yukon Brewing. I'm a big fan of some of their products, but I'm also a big fan of the hand sanitizer giveaway that they did. You know, they took their alcohol and made it into hand sanitizer and gave it away to people for a donation. I thought that was a fantastic thing to do, really helpful for the community in so many ways, and builds their brand and builds that trust with that organization. And in a competitive marketplace, the more trust customers have with you, the better you're going to do. So, homework. I'm going to ask for questions in just a moment, but I'm going to set you guys some homework. We're going to send you a link after this webinar, so don't worry about writing down the questions. I'd like you to give me some feedback on the webinar, and let me know how it was and how it could be better, most importantly. I'd like you to look at these 4 questions too. One is to describe the job your product or service does. You know, remember thinking about the benefits, describe that in a couple of sentences. Number 2, how are you going to need to adapt to the new normal? Thinking about the opportunities and some of the trends. I'd like you to list out your values, describe what that means to you, and give an example of where you bring this to life. So I've got a little thing I'm going to click on here. So for example, if, just as an example, one of your values were respect, the description would be, we always remember you are the expert in your business. And how do we bring that to life? We deal respectfully with everyone from the janitor to the chair of the board. So that would just be an example of how to talk about your values. And then 4th part, how are you going to build stronger customer relationships? I'd like you to list 3 things that you're going to do, 3 concrete things to build stronger relationships. Now, there are no prizes, I'm afraid, but it would be great if when you click the link, fill in the form, send it back to me. You don't have to send your answers back to me if you don't wish to, but it would be really helpful for me to inform webinar part 2, which I'm going to do in 2 weeks' time. And then the last thing, and certainly not least, before I move to questions, is I'd like to talk to you about the Pivot program. This is a fantastic program which has been developed, funded through ECDEV and Canor, and put in place by the fantastic team at Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Yukon College. You can get quite a big package of support from coaches and experts in all sorts of different fields, to just your business practices, to talk about supply chain, to talk about customers, HR, online, IT. Take a look at Pivot on their website. It really is a fantastic program. Right, I'm going to stop talking now for a moment and I give you guys a chance to ask any questions you would like to ask.
Thank you, Neil. And just to clarify, if you want your questions to remain anonymous, just type them on the chat and I will read them out loud. If you prefer, and if you're fine just asking your question directly to Neil, then I will unmute you all and ask away.
Okay, I see I've got a question here from Marnie. And Marnie's question is that they've been sending emails, but the difference is about losing subscribers, and this has been an issue. And is there a magic number in the volume of emails, newsletters, and updates sent out? So that's a very good question. No, there isn't a magic number. It depends on who your customers are, what you're saying to them, and really what value you're providing from those communications. So it could be, for example, if a newsletter is losing subscribers, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be some people have signed up and they weren't particularly interested in the past. It could be people are getting inundated with emails about help during the COVID-19 crisis, which is also quite possible. And people have reported being overwhelmed with communication sometime. So there isn't a magic number. It very much depends on who those people are, what you're offering, and the timing of those emails. If you want to ask that in more detail, then please feel free to email me. My email address is on the bottom of the slide there. Thanks for the question.
Any more questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or otherwise type your question on the in the chat box.
Hi, Neil. This is John Glamoris. I've got a question.
Hey, John.
Hi. My question is on return on investment. And you noted earlier on that, that spending is going to contract, both from consumers, but also businesses that have perhaps limited cash flow want to make sure the funds they are spending lead to a good return on investment. So I know these are early days and marketing is kind of a hard thing to measure, but what advice would you have to businesses and entrepreneurs to sort of track the effectiveness of their marketing to ensure they are getting good ROI?
Okay, that's a really good question, John. And actually, that's going to be one of the things I'm going to cover in the second webinar in 2 weeks' time. But to answer your question now, it's about various things. It's knowing who your customers are, and therefore, when you are marketing to them, making sure you're using the most appropriate channel to target them. So, advertising in the right places, or partnering up with the right kind of partners to reach out to the right kind of customers. It's about monitoring how effective those different campaigns are. So you need to keep track of the amount of inquiries that you get, the amount of those inquiries that turn into business, the value of that business. And then if you relate that to the amount of money that you spend to acquire those customers, then you're starting to measure your marketing return on investment. Does that make sense?
I have a question. I can hear John. I also have a question for you, Neil.
Sure.
Yeah. So how would you reach out to customers when you've never done that, right? And this just happens that you never reach out to customers, and so how do you reach out to customers and prospects? So in a way that it sounds and that it comes across as genuine and it doesn't come across as opportunistic.
Sure. And that's quite a hard line to tread sometimes. It depends on who your customers are. And it's, of course, easier to do that with businesses because businesses are more used to being communicated with by other businesses. It depends very much on the context of that's quite a difficult question to answer generally. It depends very much on, again, who your customers are and what is the reason that you're contacting them. If you suddenly send somebody a rather aggressively worded price reduction offer, now that can be seen as pretty intrusive and could be seen as being rather overly aggressive. If you write a blog, for example, giving tips about, I don't know, how to improve your quilting skills, if you own a quilting workshop or a quilting business, for example, then that could be seen by customers and potential customers as a really useful thing. And they go, oh, hang on, here's a professional, knowledgeable business. They've given me some great tips. I'm starting to feel warm and trusting towards this business. So it depends very much on the context. So hard sell is probably going to put people off. If for example, you write a blog and you put it out there, you might not necessarily get anybody looking at it. So sometimes you have to promote, but maybe you want to promote the blog rather than getting people to buy from you immediately. So if you're going out there saying, sign up to our fantastic 8 top tips for quilting newsletter, that's probably an easier sale to make fairly directly than saying, buy quilting supplies from us now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Neil.
Any other questions?
Hi, Neil, it's Jennifer. I'm curious.
Hey, Jennifer.
I'm curious about trends in collaborative partnerships among service-based businesses. And I ask that question in the spirit of a lot of the work we're doing in the CEO community across the world, where we're moving away from competition and more to collaboration. We're moving towards engaging the gift economy to some extent, and we're wanting to bring the social responsibility or the environmental responsibility to the heart and soul of our businesses. So I'm curious about your perspective around new ways of doing collaborative or partnership marketing work that's starting to help elevate or leverage your return on investment in some new creative ways.
Okay. Partnerships and partnership marketing has been very successful for a long time. You're right, it's starting to evolve now to become less competitive and more collaborative. And I think really it's careful picking of partners is the most important thing. So you need to find partners who are of a similar mindset, with a similar ethos, similar brand values, if you like, to you. And obviously key is that there's a big overlap between the customers or clients that partner has. I think in terms of finding those organizations, you have to just put your feelers out there. It's about being active in, and I know this is something that you do a lot, is being out there and being active in those forums and engaging with people in different types of forums. And then you start to get a picture of the organizations who fit your ethos. So I think it's an incredibly effective way to collaborate and to jointly offer a fantastic value to people as well. And I think the other thing is the fit between what you might do in your particular business and what somebody else does as a partner. The closer that fit, the better. So if it's something that can really enhance somebody's experience, you talked about CEO, you know, if you were partnering with somebody who offers very specific training, for example, that would go hand in hand with your coaching, then that would be something that could enhance the offering to the potential customer or client. So I think that's also something that we're seeing coming through a lot more now. So I think it's finding really good fits for partnerships. Sometimes they can feel a little tokenistic, and they're just, you know, it's one person getting somebody else's mailing list, and that doesn't work that well for the people that you're talking to. So I think that close fit, I think fit of ethos, and then the enhancement of that, you know, double or triple service or product to the end user, that's also a really important trend. Does that answer your question, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so in that case, I'm going to say you have my email address there. If anybody has any other questions they would like to ask personally, I'm very happy for you to email me. But I'm now going to pass you over to John Glyn Morris to just tell you about a fantastic opportunity coming up in the Yukon. John.
Thank you, Neil. And folks, this is 120 seconds or less. So, have you ever wondered why so many companies leverage the Yukon in their brand, but that have nothing to do with the Yukon? So Neil, who you've been hearing from, and Joella Hogan, who's also on the call, and I and some others have sort of been wondering what's going on here. Next slide. In fact, we have come up with over 50 of these businesses, mostly in the United States, but some ranging as far from Estonia and Israel. And it's kind of crazy, but I think it also speaks to the power and potential of the Yukon as a brand. Next slide. So what we did is we decided to ask a question. How can Yukoners better leverage the power of the emotional brand appeal of the Yukon in a way that has broad socioeconomic application and which benefits and resonates with Yukoners? In other words, how can the Yukon better benefit and shape our story? Next slide. So we did something that actually isn't that complicated, and we didn't invent it, but we would like to connect the dots between three things. First is our consumer perception, whoever that is, regardless of whether it's a product or service, what is their perception of us, of the Yukon, whatever that is, and what is the commercial brand we're trying to tell, and how do we connect it with what is authentically Yukon, this idea of place DNA. We're interested in the intersection of those three circles. Neil, next slide, please. Now, we're not the first to ask this question, and of course, branding has been done in the Yukon for a long time, particularly with tourism. And they've built their larger-than-life brand, which everyone knows about, and has some very large strengths to it. The problem is twofold. One, we have finite capacity in the Yukon. Secondly, tourism is not the only aspect of our economy. So what about products like Yukon soap or Yukon brewing? What about knowledge like Proof and GovTech or some of the services that Jennifer was talking about? What about investment, whether it's capital or social, and attracting people to invest in the Yukon? And what about talent? Whether it's remote or physically moving to the Yukon, we want to attract and retain talent. So how do we create a brand that isn't applesauce, but has application on more than just tourism? Next slide. So this is the idea of something we're calling the Yukon story. And you'll have to pardon the spaghetti on the wall. Welcome to John's brain. But we're calling this the Yukon story because we are inspired by a team in New Zealand that is really leading the charge at adding this place DNA to their New Zealand brand in something that has more application than just tourism. It's not an either or, it's about and. So we see a need to diversify our economy. I think that's obvious, but I think we all appreciate the importance of that. We also know that COVID is asking us some pretty important questions. And of course, the focus right now is on relief. But at a certain point, we also need to start talking about repositioning ourselves and rebounding in the direction that we want to. So that's where we see an opportunity. And taking a page from community development, you identify and you focus on your strengths. And for us, we believe one of those great strengths we have is the power of the Yukon brand. So that's what the Yukon story is about. How do we build something that has cross-sector benefit, that is both values tested, so it resonates with Yukoners, but also resonates with our market? You know, whatever that is, whether it's Yukon Brewing or a service or Air North, we need to find that sync. Now, fundamentally, what it's going to be is a series of, I'll call it assets, you know, things that businesses can use, whether it's training like workshops or photography, and I'll get into that in my last slide, but it's some very tangible things that businesses can use. It doesn't mean that we're all doing the exact same thing, but it does mean that when we're telling or using and celebrating the Yukon in whatever it is that we provide, we're doing so in a way that is coordinated. Because if it isn't coordinated, we're actually creating confusion. So we are pivoting. This has been going on for about a year, and it's had a bit of a pause. We're jumping back in. And like everyone, we're learning to pivot. And what we're trying to figure out is how we apply some of the principles of lean into branding so that we create something that is agile. So I won't say much more beyond that if you're interested to learn more, I know some folks have heard of this, you've got Neil's contact information, and let him know because he's part of the team that wants to build this. And we're very excited about it. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you very much, John. So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much to everybody for joining the webinar today. There will be part 2 in 2 weeks' time. And on that webinar, I'm going to be focusing on how to identify and target your best customers. I'm going to be talking, as John asked the question, about marketing return on investment, and talking a little bit about messaging, how you communicate to customers in a way that produces a good marketing ROI as well. You'll be shortly receiving a link. I would really appreciate some feedback on the webinar, how we can make it better. If you'd like to share your answers to the homework questions with me, that'd be super, and I'll use them to help inform part 2. Thank you so much. Good luck with getting your businesses to thrive. I know you are all super talented people, and remember Lana Selby's words, the magic is in your head. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks, everyone.